Have you ever looked at a small garden and wondered how it could possibly produce so much food? Have you ever seen a garden no bigger than a parking space, filled with tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplants, and rows of fresh green vegetables? And have you ever wondered why those tiny gardens often look healthier and more productive than gardens that are many times larger? Many people have experienced the opposite situation. They have a large backyard with plenty of space, yet their harvest is small and sometimes disappointing. Plants grow slowly, leaves may look weak, and pests sometimes appear at the worst possible moment. Why do some large gardens struggle to produce even a small basket of vegetables? And why do some small gardens seem to provide food week after week throughout the growing season? Is it because those gardeners have special soil that others do not have? Are they using secret seeds that most people have never heard of? Or could it be that they simply understand something important about gardening that many of us have overlooked? When people first start gardening, they often assume that success depends on adding more things to the garden: more fertilizer, more watering, and sometimes more equipment. When plants struggle, the first reaction is often to add something new to the soil or to change the plant variety. But after a few seasons, many gardeners realize that these solutions do not always solve the problem. The truth is often much simpler. The difference between an average garden and a thriving garden usually does not come from the size of the land. It rarely comes from rare seeds or expensive fertilizers. In many cases, the real difference comes from the way the garden is designed and the way plants interact with each other inside that space. For centuries, gardeners in Japan have developed thoughtful methods for growing a surprising amount of food in very limited areas. In many Japanese cities, home gardens can be only a few square meters in size. Yet these gardens often grow a wide variety of vegetables, herbs, and seasonal crops. This is not magic, and it is not luck. It is the result of careful observation and a philosophy that focuses on working with nature instead of constantly trying to control it. Today, this idea has become even more important. More than half of the world's population now lives in cities, which means gardening space is becoming smaller for many people. Balconies, small backyards, and compact garden beds are now the most common growing spaces for urban gardeners. Because of this, many people are searching for ways to produce more food in limited space. Interestingly, modern agricultural research has started to support many of the ideas that traditional Japanese gardeners have practiced for generations. Studies on intercropping show that when plants are arranged thoughtfully, they can support each other instead of competing for resources. Some plants help improve soil conditions, while others attract beneficial insects or provide natural protection from pests. When these relationships are understood, a garden can become a balanced living system rather than a collection of individual plants. In this video, we are going to explore 8 simple gardening secrets inspired by traditional Japanese gardens. These ideas do not require complicated tools, and they do not demand years of professional experience. They are practical methods that any gardener can begin experimenting with during the next growing season. One of the final secrets may sound unusual at first, because it is not really a technique in the traditional sense. Yet many experienced gardeners believe that this simple practice can completely change the way we care for our gardens and how we observe the plants around us. Before we explore each of these 8 secrets, there is one important idea that helps explain why these methods work so well. It is a guiding principle that has shaped Japanese gardening for generations, and understanding it will help everything else make much more sense. The important principle that many Japanese gardeners follow is based on a very simple idea. Instead of constantly trying to control the garden, they learn to observe nature and work alongside it. This approach encourages gardeners to pay attention to the soil, the plants, and the many living organisms that exist within the garden environment. When you begin to see your garden in this way, something interesting becomes clear. Plants do not grow alone. Each plant interacts with the plants and organisms around it in ways that are often invisible at first glance. From this philosophy, we arrive at the first secret. This method is known by many gardeners around the world. But in Japanese gardens, it is practiced with careful attention and long observation. The first secret is companion planting. Companion planting simply means growing certain plants close to each other so they can support one another. Some plants release natural compounds that repel pests. Others attract beneficial insects that help control harmful species. Certain plants can even improve soil structure or provide nutrients that nearby plants can use. One well-known example involves tomatoes and aromatic herbs. When herbs with strong scents grow near tomato plants, the aroma can confuse insects that normally attack tomato leaves. This simple relationship helps reduce pest pressure without the need for additional treatments. Another example can be seen when members of the onion family grow near certain vegetables. The distinctive scent of these plants can discourage pests from settling in the area. Over time, these natural plant partnerships create a garden that begins to regulate itself. Modern research on intercropping supports many of these observations. When different plants share the same space, their roots often reach into different layers of soil. One plant may draw nutrients from deeper levels, while another gathers nutrients closer to the surface. Because of this, the soil resources are used more efficiently, and overall productivity can increase. Once we understand how plants can support each other, the second secret becomes easier to appreciate. This secret focuses on the way plants are arranged inside the garden. Many gardeners are familiar with planting crops in long, straight rows with wide spaces between them. While this layout can make maintenance simple, it often leaves valuable growing space unused. In many Japanese gardens, plants are arranged in triangular or zigzag patterns rather than straight lines. Instead of placing plants directly behind one another, each plant is positioned in the gap between two plants in the row ahead. When viewed from above, the pattern looks like a repeating zigzag across the garden bed. This arrangement offers several advantages. First, it allows more plants to grow within the same area while still giving each plant access to sunlight and nutrients. As the plants mature, their leaves gently touch and form a natural canopy above the soil. This canopy helps shade the ground and slows the loss of moisture. Research into intensive planting methods has shown that carefully spaced plants can create a small and stable environment within the garden bed. Soil stays cooler and retains moisture longer. Weed growth is also reduced because less sunlight reaches the soil surface. When these first two secrets are used together, something interesting begins to happen. The garden stops behaving like a collection of individual plants. Instead, it becomes a small living system where plants support each other and every part of the space is used efficiently. But even with these improvements, there is another essential element that determines whether a garden will truly thrive. That element lies just beneath our feet. It is the soil itself. Soil is often the most overlooked element when people begin gardening. Many beginners focus on seeds, sunlight, and watering schedules. These factors are certainly important, but if you carefully observe highly productive gardens, you will notice that one of the greatest secrets often lies beneath the surface. Soil is not simply a material that holds plants upright. It is a living ecosystem filled with microorganisms that constantly work to break down organic matter and release nutrients that plants can use. In traditional Japanese gardens, gardeners pay close attention to nurturing the soil over time. One method that has been practiced for generations is a fermentation process known as bokashi. This method originated in Japan and has become widely known among gardeners who want to improve soil health naturally. Unlike traditional composting, which relies mainly on slow decomposition, bokashi uses beneficial microorganisms to ferment organic materials. During fermentation, the nutrients in kitchen scraps are preserved instead of being lost through heat and long decomposition. As a result, the fermented material becomes a rich amendment that can greatly improve soil fertility. When these fermented materials are buried in the soil, they begin interacting with the microbial life already present in the ground. soil organisms continue to break down the material and gradually release nutrients that plants can absorb. Over time, gardeners often notice that the soil becomes darker, softer, and easier for roots to penetrate. The process itself is fairly simple. Gardeners collect kitchen scraps, such as vegetable peels, fruit skins, or leftover rice. These materials are placed in a sealed container and mixed with bokashi brine, which contains beneficial microorganisms. After about 2 weeks, the fermentation process is complete. The fermented mixture can then be buried in garden beds, where it continues enriching the soil. Scientific studies on soil health emphasize the importance of microbial activity for plant growth. When beneficial microorganisms thrive in the soil, they help convert organic matter into nutrients that plants can easily absorb. Healthy soil biology often leads to stronger stems, deeper green leaves, and improved resistance to environmental stress. However, healthy soil alone is not enough to create a thriving garden. The way water is delivered to plants also plays a major role in determining how well they grow. This leads us to the next secret that many Japanese gardeners consider a skill that takes time to learn. There is a saying among experienced gardeners that learning how to water properly can take years of observation. At first, this might sound surprising. After all, watering a plant seems simple. But the method and timing of watering can greatly influence how plant roots develop. One of the most common mistakes is watering very frequently, but only applying small amounts of water each time. When moisture remains only near the surface, plant roots tend to stay shallow because they don't need to grow deeper in search of water. Shallow roots make plants more vulnerable to heat stress and dry conditions. Experienced gardeners often prefer a different approach. Instead of watering lightly every day, they water deeply, but less frequently. When water penetrates deeper into the soil, it encourages roots to grow downward where moisture remains more stable. Plants with deeper root systems are generally stronger and better able to handle dry weather. A simple way to observe this is to check how far the moisture travels after watering. If the soil remains moist several centimeters below the surface, it means the water has reached the root zone. This environment encourages healthy root development, which in turn allows plants to absorb nutrients more efficiently. Once soil health improves and watering practices support deeper root growth, the garden begins to feel more balanced and resilient. But even with these improvements, gardeners still face another challenge. Many gardens produce large harvests for a short period and then remain empty for weeks. To keep a garden productive throughout the entire season, there is another strategy that experienced gardeners often rely on. That strategy involves carefully planning when each crop is planted, so that harvests continue one after another. Once soil health improves and plants develop stronger root systems through proper watering, a garden often becomes more stable and productive. However, many gardeners still face a common challenge. For a short period of time, the garden produces an abundance of vegetables. But soon afterward, the beds become empty and the harvest slows down. This situation usually happens when all crops are planted at the same time and mature together. After everything is harvested, the garden suddenly has large empty spaces, and production stops until the next planting begins. Experienced Japanese gardeners often avoid this problem by using a method known as succession planting. The idea is simple, but extremely effective. Instead of planting all seeds at once, gardeners spread their planting schedule across the growing season. When one group of plants is close to harvest, another group is just beginning to grow. For example, leafy greens, such as lettuce, spinach, or mustard greens, can be planted in small batches every 2 or 3 weeks. By the time the first planting is harvested, the next group of plants is already developing. This ensures that the garden continues producing fresh food throughout the season. Succession planting offers several advantages. First, it creates a steady supply of vegetables, rather than a single large towers harvest. Gardeners avoid the problem of having too much produce at once, while also preventing long gaps without food from the garden. Second, it helps maximize the use of available space. Garden beds rarely remain empty because new crops are always being introduced as older crops finish. Another benefit is flexibility. Gardeners can observe how different plants respond to changing weather conditions. If a particular crop performs well during a certain time of year, it can be planted again in the next cycle. If another crop struggles, it can easily be replaced with a different variety. When succession planting is combined with thoughtful spacing and healthy soil practices, the garden begins to function like a continuous system. Each area of the garden bed serves a purpose at a specific time, and plants move through the space in a natural rhythm. Yet there is another factor that plays a major role in maintaining this balance. It involves how we protect and care for the surface of the soil. In many traditional Japanese gardens, gardeners try to avoid leaving bare soil exposed for long periods of time. When soil is left uncovered under direct sunlight, moisture can evaporate quickly, and the soil structure can become compacted. Bare soil also creates an ideal environment for weeds to establish themselves. To prevent this, many gardeners use a technique known as living mulch. Instead of covering the soil with straw or other dry materials, they plant low-growing plants that spread across the surface of the soil. One commonly used plant for this purpose is white clover. This small plant grows low to the ground and forms a soft green carpet beneath larger vegetable plants. Its roots help keep the soil loose, and it also contributes small amounts of natural nitrogen to the soil. Living mulch provides several benefits. It protects soil moisture and reduces weed growth by blocking sunlight from reaching the soil surface. As the roots of the ground-covering plants grow and eventually die, they create tiny channels in the soil that allow water and air to move more easily. Beneath the surface soil, microorganisms also benefit from this living cover. The additional organic matter feeds microbial life, which continues supporting plant growth. Over time, the garden develops into a more stable and balanced ecosystem. When these methods work together, the garden begins to show clear improvements in productivity and resilience. Yet there are still two fascinating ideas that many traditional Japanese gardeners continue to practice. One of them is connected to a natural cycle that we all see in the night sky. Throughout history, many agricultural traditions have developed by carefully observing natural cycles. Farmers and gardeners across different cultures have watched the patterns of nature for generations, looking for signs that might help them understand when to plant and how to care for their crops. In traditional Japanese gardening, there is also a practice connected to one of the most visible natural cycles in our sky. That cycle is the movement of the moon. Many Japanese gardeners believe that the different phases of the moon may influence soil moisture and plant growth. This idea is not unique to Japan. Lunar planting calendars have existed in many farming cultures around the world. For centuries, farmers have used the moon as a guide when deciding when to plant certain crops. According to traditional observations, the waxing phase of the moon occurs when the moon grows from new moon toward full moon. During this time, some gardeners believe that moisture in the soil is drawn slightly closer to the surface. Because of this, they prefer to plant crops that grow above the ground during this period. These include plants such as tomatoes, beans, cucumbers, and leafy greens. When the moon begins to move from full moon toward new moon, it enters what is called the waning phase. During this period, some gardeners believe soil moisture becomes more stable, deeper underground. This phase is often associated with planting root crops, such as carrots, or beets, radishes, and potatoes. It is important to understand that modern scientific research has not fully confirmed whether lunar cycles have a measurable influence on plant growth. Some studies suggest the effect may be very small or difficult to observe under normal gardening conditions. However, many experienced gardeners continue to follow lunar calendars because the practice encourages them to observe natural rhythms more closely. Paying attention to the cycles of the moon can help gardeners slow down and think carefully about when and how they work in the garden. If you are curious about this idea, you can easily test it in your own garden. For example, you might plant half of your carrot seeds during the waning moon and plant the other half at a different time. By comparing the results, you can decide for yourself whether the timing made a difference. Regardless of the outcome, the process of observing and experimenting can deepen your understanding of your garden. Yet among all the ideas we have discussed so far, the final secret may be the most surprising of all. That is because it is not really about planting methods, soil preparation, or watering techniques. The final secret has more to do with the relationship between the gardener and the garden. In many traditional Japanese gardens, gardeners practice a simple habit of expressing gratitude toward the plants and the soil. Before harvesting or while tending to the garden, they may pause for a moment to acknowledge the plants and appreciate the food that will soon grow from the soil. To some people, this may sound unusual, but when you think about it, the practice has a very practical effect. When gardeners slow down and approach their garden with attention and appreciation, they begin to notice small changes that might otherwise go unnoticed. They may detect early signs of pests noticed when leaves begin to wilt, or recognize when the soil needs additional care. This level of attention often leads to better decisions and healthier plants. Whether plants truly respond to human voices or not remains an open question. What is certain is that attentive gardeners almost always grow healthier gardens. And sometimes, the greatest change does not come from new tools or techniques, but from a shift in how we observe the living world around us. Before we finish, there is one final tip that many Japanese farmers have used for generations to give young seedlings a stronger start in the garden. Before we finish exploring these gardening ideas, there is one more small but fascinating tip that many Japanese gardeners have used for generations. What makes this tip especially interesting is that it does not require any special equipment, and almost everyone can try it using something already found in their kitchen. This final idea involves something very simple. It is rice water. In many Asian households, rice is a daily staple food. Before cooking, rice is usually rinsed in water to remove dust and excess starch from the grains. The cloudy water that remains after rinsing is often poured down the drain without much thought. However, in many traditional Japanese gardens, this rice water is considered a useful natural resource for the soil. Rice water contains small amounts of starch vitamins and minerals that are released from the outer surface of the rice grains during rinsing. When this water is added to garden soil, the nutrients do not immediately feed the plants directly. Instead, they become food for beneficial microorganisms living in the soil. As these microorganisms grow and multiply, they help break down organic matter and convert nutrients into forms that plants can absorb more easily. This means rice water indirectly improves the living ecosystem of the soil. When soil contains active microbial life, plants often develop stronger stems, greener leaves, and more vigorous growth. Some gardeners have observed that seedlings watered with rice water appear to establish themselves more quickly during the early stages of growth. Using rice water in the garden is very simple. When rinsing rice for cooking, you can save the first cloudy rinse water in a container. Allow the water to cool to room temperature before applying it to plants. The water can then be used to gently water seedlings or newly transplanted plants. Applying rice water once or twice a week is usually sufficient. One important detail is that rice water should be used relatively fresh. If it is left sitting for too long, it may begin to ferment and develop a sour smell. In that case, it is best not to apply it directly to plants. This simple practice reminds us that many effective gardening solutions are often hidden within everyday habits. When gardeners start noticing these small details, their gardens gradually become more efficient. Natural systems, where resources are reused instead of wasted. Looking back at everything we have discussed in this video, you may notice that none of these Japanese gardening ideas depend on complicated tools or expensive materials. Instead, they are based on thoughtful principles. These include planting crops that support each other, arranging plants carefully within the available space, nourishing the soil through microbial life, watering deeply to strengthen roots, planting crops in succession to maintain continuous harvests, protecting soil with living ground cover, observing natural cycles, and approaching the garden with attention and gratitude. Each one of these practices may seem small on its own, but when several of them are combined, the garden begins to function as a balanced ecosystem. Plants become healthier, soil becomes richer, and the gardener develops a deeper connection with the land. It is important to remember that you do not need to apply every idea all at once. A good approach is to begin with 1 or 2 methods that feel most practical for your garden. Observe how your plants respond and adjust your methods gradually over time. Every garden is unique. Soil conditions, climate, and personal experience are always different. But when you begin to observe carefully and work with natural systems, instead of against them, your garden can slowly transform into a vibrant living space. If the ideas in this video have helped you see your garden in a new way, consider experimenting with one of these techniques during your next growing season. The next time you step into your garden, take a moment to observe what is happening around you. Even the smallest garden can become a place of discovery, patience, and quiet abundance.